Pennsylvania is not a state most people associate with the bizarre. You think history, you think rolling farmland, you think Amish country and cheesesteaks. And then you learn there's a town where the ground has been literally on fire since 1962, a field of rocks that ring like bells when you hit them, and a museum with slices of Albert Einstein's brain in a wooden box. Welcome to the 12 most unusual places in Pennsylvania that really exist. Place 12, Centralia, the town that's been on fire since 1962. Let's start with the one that sounds the most made up. Centralia is a borough in Columbia County that once had a population of around 1,000 people. Today, fewer than 5 people live there. The streets are mostly gone. Most of the buildings have been demolished. The zip code no longer exists. The U.S. Postal Service discontinued it in 2002. And underneath what's left of the town, an underground coal mine fire has been burning continuously since 1962. Here's how it started. On May 27, 1962, members of Centralia's volunteer fire department set fire to the town's garbage dump, a repurposed open-pit mine, to clean it up before Memorial Day. This had been done before, but this time, the fire found an unsealed opening at the bottom of the pit that led directly into the labyrinth of abandoned coal tunnels running beneath the entire borough. Once it got in there, it was over. Pennsylvania and federal authorities spent years and millions of dollars trying to extinguish the fire through excavation, flooding, and other methods. Nothing worked. By the early 1980s, the ground temperature in parts of Centralia exceeded 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon monoxide was seeping into homes. Sinkholes were opening in yards. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy fell into a sudden sinkhole in his backyard and was pulled out by his cousin just before the hole expanded. In 1984, Congress appropriated $42 million to relocate residents who wanted to leave. Most took the buyout. In 1992, Pennsylvania condemned the entire borough through eminent domain. The fire is still burning. It currently reaches depths of up to 300 feet, covers approximately 6 square miles, and advances roughly 75 feet per year along 4 separate fronts. Geologists estimate it could continue burning for another 250 years. What's left of Centralia today is a strange place to walk through. Grid streets with no houses, driveways that lead to empty lots, steam rising from cracks in the earth, graffiti covering what remains of an abandoned section of Pennsylvania Route 61, which had to be rerouted after the fire buckled the road. A Ukrainian Catholic church that still holds weekly services, spared because solid rock, not coal, sits beneath it. Centralia is also widely credited as one of the inspirations for the setting of the 2006 horror film Silent Hill, which makes sense. The town already looks like a horror film. What makes Centralia particularly haunting beyond the fire itself is the infrastructure of a functioning American borough still technically in place around nothing. There's a borough council that still holds occasional meetings. The Ukrainian Catholic Church still holds weekly Sunday services and draws worshipers from surrounding communities. 2 cemeteries remain, their grave markers standing above ground that reportedly reaches volcanic temperatures just a few feet below the surface. Geologists noted early on that the solid rock foundation beneath the church means it won't collapse into the fire. The people who remained have, in other words, organized their spiritual life around the one building guaranteed not to fall into the earth. Pennsylvania has a deep tradition of pragmatism, and Centralia honors it in its own unusual way. Place 11, the Mütter Museum, Philadelphia. If you ever find yourself thinking, I'd like to see Einstein's brain today, Philadelphia is your city. The Mütter Museum, operated by the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, opened in 1858 and was built around the private collection of Dr. Thomas Dent Mütter, a 19th century surgeon who operated on patients with unusual anatomy and kept meticulous records and specimens of what he found. Today, the museum houses more than 25,000 anatomical and pathological specimens, with about 13% on display at any given time. The collection includes 139 human skulls acquired from Viennese anatomist Joseph Hertel in 1874. The skeleton of Harry Eastlack, a Philadelphia man whose muscles and connective tissue slowly turned to bone over his lifetime due to a rare condition called fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. The Soap Lady, a woman exhumed from a Philadelphia grave in 1875 whose body fat had converted into a waxy, soap-like substance called adipocere that perfectly preserved her remains. A plaster cast of the conjoined liver of Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins, and a tumor removed from the jaw of President Grover Cleveland in 1893 during a secret surgery performed on a yacht. And then there's the Einstein collection. On April 18, 1955, pathologist Thomas Harvey performed the autopsy on Albert Einstein at Princeton Hospital. Without the family's permission, Harvey removed Einstein's brain and took it with him. He was eventually fired from the hospital. Over the following decades, he carried sections of Einstein's brain across the country in various containers, at one point in a cider box, later in Tupperware in the trunk of his Buick, sending small portions to researchers, and eventually, in a surreal 1997 road trip, driving what remained to California to meet Einstein's granddaughter. In 2011, neuropathologist Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams donated 46 microscope slides containing thin sections of Einstein's brain to the Mütter Museum. They are now the only permanent public display of Einstein's brain in the world. Einstein, for what it's worth, had explicitly requested cremation so that, in his words, "People don't come worship at my bones." His brain had other plans. The Mütter Museum is open daily. Photography is prohibited inside. Children are welcome, but must be accompanied by an adult. Place 10. Ringing Rocks Park, Bucks County. About an hour north of Philadelphia, in the woods above the Delaware River, there's a 7-acre field of boulders. The park around it is 123 acres, but most people are there for one thing: to bring a hammer and hit the rocks. Ringing Rocks Park in Upper Black Eddy, Bucks County, gets its name from the diabase boulders that ring like bells when struck with a hard object. Not all of them ring, some are dead and produce nothing, but many produce clear, distinct tones when hit, and different rocks produce different pitches. The boulders are piled up to 10 feet high across the entire field. Visitors routinely wander through tapping different stones, searching for the ones with the best tone. The rocks are made of diabase, an igneous rock rich in iron that formed during the Jurassic period, roughly 200 million years ago. Why these particular boulders ring when struck, while most igneous rocks of similar composition do not, is still not definitively understood. Geologists have proposed theories involving internal stress caused by natural weathering, the density and composition of the diabase, and the specific way the boulders are isolated from each other in the field. None of the theories have been conclusively proven. The most notable historical use of the rocks took place in 1890, when local physician Dr. J.J. Ott selected boulders of varying pitches, arranged them, and performed a concert for the Buckwampum Historical Society of Bucks County, accompanied by a brass ensemble. It may be the first rock concert in American history, depending on how generous you want to be with the definition. The park also contains Bucks County's largest waterfall, trails through old-growth woodland, and a remarkably straightforward sign at the trailhead. Bring a hammer. Place 9, the Haines Shoe House, York County. In 1948, a shoe salesman named Malin Haines handed an architect one of his own work boots and said simply, "Build me a house like this." The architect did. The result is the Haines Shoe House, a 25-foot tall, 48-foot long, 5-story structure shaped like a work boot, sitting on Shoehouse Road near York, Pennsylvania, visible from US Route 30. The living room is in the toe, the kitchen is in the heel, the bedrooms are in the ankle. There is also a shoe-shaped doghouse on the property. Malin Haines, known locally as Haines the Shoe Wizard, ran what had grown into one of the largest shoe store chains in the region. By the 1930s, he had around 40 stores across Pennsylvania and northern Maryland. He built the shoe house as a piece of roadside advertising. A giant, unmissable shoe along the Lincoln Highway, one of America's earliest cross-country roads. Haines never lived in the shoe. Instead, he used it as a promotional tool. For the first several years, he invited elderly couples, 38 per year, to stay in the shoe for a free weekend. Then, he ran vacation contests for newlyweds affiliated with his stores. Winners received a fully staffed week, maid, chauffeur, butler, free shoes. After Haines died in 1962, the house passed through a series of owners, served as an ice cream parlor for a stretch, began falling into disrepair, was rescued by Haines's granddaughter in 1987, and eventually passed to its current owners, who now rent it through Airbnb. It received a historical marker from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission in 2023, which officially recognized it as a notable example of mid-20th century programmatic architecture. The academic term for a building shaped like the thing it sells is programmatic architecture. The more accurate term is a giant shoe you can sleep in. Place 8, Gravity Hill, Bedford County. Pennsylvania has several gravity hills, but the one in Bedford County, south of Harrisburg, is the most famous. The premise is simple. You drive to a specific unmarked spot on a back road, put your car in neutral, and the car rolls, apparently uphill, on its own. No engine, no slope you can see. Just your car creeping forward in a direction that looks wrong. It is, of course, an optical illusion. The landscape around Gravity Hill creates a visual context in which a downhill slope appears to be uphill. Your eyes read the surrounding terrain, the tree line, and the curve of the road and come to the wrong conclusion. Your car is not rolling uphill. Gravity is not reversing. But the illusion is so convincing that even people who understand exactly what is happening still find themselves staring at it in mild disbelief. Gravity hills exist in other states and other countries. Pennsylvania just has several of them, which says something about the topography of the state or possibly about the personality type of the people who settled it. The Bedford County location has been drawing curious visitors for decades and requires no admission, no reservation, and no equipment other than a car you're willing to put in neutral on an isolated country road. The experience lasts about 30 seconds. It's worth the drive. Place 7. The Pagoda, Reading. Reading, Pennsylvania is a small city that has had a complicated few decades economically. It is not typically where you'd expect to find a Japanese-style pagoda sitting on a clifftop overlooking the whole town. And yet, the pagoda was built in 1908 by businessman William Abbott Whitman, who purchased a hilltop on Mount Penn, previously scarred by quarrying operations, and decided to turn it into something. His original plan was a luxury resort hotel. The building was constructed in a Japanese architectural style, 7 stories tall, with tiered roofs and red lacquer finish. It is one of very few examples of Japanese pagoda architecture on the east coast of the United States. The resort plan never materialized. Whitman failed to obtain the required liquor license, a fairly critical component of a resort in 1908, and was forced to sell the property to the city of Reading for $1 in order to avoid demolition. The city converted it into a public landmark, and it has been a reading institution ever since. Inside the pagoda is a large bronze bell that was cast in 18th century Japan and once hung in a Buddhist temple before being acquired for the Reading Pagoda. At night, the building is illuminated in red LED lights and can be seen from across the city. The views from the balcony of the surrounding Berks County landscape are genuinely excellent. Reading built its most recognizable landmark on a quarry scar, almost accidentally, by a businessman who just wanted to open a hotel. Pennsylvania has a way of producing these outcomes. The pagoda sat in uncertain ownership for many years after Reading acquired it. At one point, the city tried to sell it, but public opposition was strong enough to keep it in city hands. The structure underwent restoration work in the late 20th century, and today it is maintained as a public landmark open to visitors most days of the year. The Reading Pagoda Civic Association, a volunteer group, has been involved in its upkeep and programming for decades. It shows up on lists of the most unexpected landmarks in the entire northeastern United States, and with good reason. There is genuinely nothing else quite like it between New York City and Washington, D.C. The fact that it sits above a mid-sized Pennsylvania city that most Americans have never visited only adds to its unlikely charm. Place 6. Trundle Manor, Pittsburgh. Trundle Manor is a private residence in Swissvale, a neighborhood on the edge of Pittsburgh. The owners, known publicly as Mr. Arm and Arm, open parts of it to evening and weekend tours by appointment, and they describe it as the most unusual tourist trap in the world meets the most bizarre private collection on display. That is not an exaggeration. The house contains jarred specimens, antique taxidermy in states of disrepair, old medical implements of a deeply unsettling nature, coffins, bizarre weaponry, curiosities of indeterminate origin, and items that defy easy categorization. The donation request for admission is listed as money, taxidermy, dead things, killing implements, and even booze. Trundle Manor operates in the tradition of the Victorian-era cabinet of curiosities. Private collections assembled more for the pleasure of accumulation than for any coherent educational purpose. The difference is that most Victorian cabinets were eventually donated to museums. Trundle Manor is still someone's house. Tours run on evenings and weekends by appointment. The tone is theatrical, self-aware, and genuinely weird in a way that's clearly intentional. Pittsburgh has enough conventional attractions, Carnegie Museums, the Warhol Museum, Three Rivers, that a Victorian curiosity house on the edge of the city barely registers as unusual in the broader context of the place. Trundle Manor registers anyway. Place 5. The Stoogeum, Ambler. There is a 3-story museum in Ambler, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles north of Philadelphia, dedicated entirely to the Three Stooges. The Stoogeum contains more than 100,000 items related to Moe Howard, Larry Fine, Curly Howard, and their various partners and successors. The collection includes original film reels stored in a 16mm film vault, memorabilia, costumes, signed photographs, scripts, promotional materials, and a dedicated 85-seat theater for screenings and special events. It also contains a research library for scholars and enthusiasts who wish to study the Three Stooges with the seriousness the institution believes they deserve. The Stoogeum was founded by Gary Lassin, whose family had deep ties to the Stooges. Larry Fine was his wife's cousin. Lassin spent decades assembling the collection and opened the museum in 2004. It is operated by the Larry Fine Foundation, and admission is free, though tours are by reservation. It is, by a significant margin, the most comprehensive repository of Three Stooges history in the world. That this repository exists in suburban Philadelphia, housed in a custom-built facility with a climate-controlled film vault, is the kind of thing that makes Pennsylvania interesting in ways that don't show up on standard tourist maps. If you ever wanted to see an 85-seat theater dedicated to nuke humor, Ambler is your answer. Place 4. Kecksburg UFO Monument, Kecksburg. On the evening of December 9, 1965, residents across a wide swath of the northeastern United States and Canada observed a bright fireball in the sky. It was seen from Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. In Kecksburg, a small rural community about 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, witnesses reported seeing the object come down through the trees and land in the woods nearby. Within hours, state police and military personnel arrived and cordoned off the area. Witnesses described seeing a large, acorn-shaped metallic object with strange markings around its base. Described as resembling a combination of Egyptian hieroglyphs and ancient script, being loaded onto a flatbed truck and removed in the night. The official explanation from the U.S. Air Force was that the object was a meteor or space debris. No physical evidence was ever publicly produced. The Air Force officially classified the incident as unknown. In 1990, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries produced an episode about Kecksburg. The production team left behind a full-scale replica of the described object, and the town placed it on permanent display outside the local volunteer fire station. Every year, Kecksburg holds a UFO festival, drawing visitors from across the country. NASA conducted a study of the incident in 2003, reviewing available documentation, and concluded that the object was likely a Soviet satellite, though this explanation hasn't fully satisfied researchers who've studied the case. The Kecksburg incident remains one of the most documented and debated unexplained aerial events in American history, and the town has leaned into its identity with remarkable good humor. It's worth noting that Kecksburg is not a large town. It has no traffic lights, no major retail, and no particular reason for most people to stop there. But every summer, the UFO festival draws crowds that temporarily outnumber the local population by a considerable margin, which is a testament to the enduring human appetite for a good mystery with no definitive resolution. One local resident described the annual festival this way: "People come from everywhere, scientists, conspiracy theorists, curious people, and they all end up eating pierogies and talking to each other." That's Pennsylvania for you. Place 3. Ephrata Cloister, Ephrata. Ephrata Cloister is a state historic site in Lancaster County, and it is one of the genuinely stranger chapters in early American history. In 1732, a German religious mystic named Johann Conrad Beissel founded a celibate monastic community in the Pennsylvania wilderness. Beissel taught that Saturday, not Sunday, was the true Sabbath, that celibacy was spiritually superior to marriage, and that sleep deprivation, sleeping on narrow wooden benches with wooden blocks for pillows for only a few hours each night, was a path to spiritual enlightenment. He composed hundreds of hymns for the community to sing in a distinctive German choral style that visitors still come to hear performed today. The community, known as the Ephrata Cloister, grew to include separate houses for celibate men, celibate women, and married members. At its peak in the 1740s and 1750s, several hundred people lived there. Members wore white habits and took new religious names. During the Revolutionary War, the cloister served as a hospital for soldiers wounded at the Battle of Brandywine in 1777, and many residents died of typhus contracted from the patients they cared for. The community gradually declined through the late 18th century as its founders' teachings fell out of favor and members died or left. The original groups disbanded between 1929 and 1934. Pennsylvania acquired the property and began preservation efforts during World War II. Today, the cloister buildings are among the oldest surviving Germanic buildings in North America, and actors in period clothing lead tours through the narrow sleeping quarters, the printing house, and the meeting halls of what was, by any reasonable measure, America's first commune. The printing house deserves a separate mention. The cloister operated one of the earliest printing operations in colonial Pennsylvania, producing religious texts in German and English. The press was active from around 1745, and the community's publishing output was significant enough that it attracted notice from Benjamin Franklin, who had his own print operation in Philadelphia. The community also maintained a school open to the public, which was unusual for a celibate religious community that had little interest in engaging with wider society. It turns out that even people who believe in sleeping on wooden blocks with wooden pillows need somewhere to send the neighbor's kids for reading lessons. Place 2. Pizza Brain Museum, Philadelphia. In 2012, a group of pizza enthusiasts in Philadelphia opened what they certified, with help from the Guinness World Records organization, as the world's largest collection of pizza memorabilia. The Pizza Brain Museum holds more than 550 artifacts in rotation, including vintage pizza boxes, pizza-themed art, advertising materials, restaurant signage, clothing, toys, and items of classification that presumably only make sense to people whose entire life philosophy is organized around pizza. The collection is housed in a building that also operates as an actual functioning pizzeria, making it the world's first pizza culture museum and working pizza shop simultaneously. Philadelphia has a long and confident tradition of pizza identity. The city sits in a fascinating middle ground between New York style and more experimental regional approaches, and the pizza brain leans fully into that identity. The Guinness certification is real. The collection is real. The pizza is real. It's the kind of place that only exists in a city self-confident enough to build a museum around something it loves unabashedly and without apology. There is literally no other place like this on Earth, one visitor noted in an early review. That's not quite right. There was no other place like this on Earth before it existed. Now there's one, and it's in Fishtown, Philadelphia. Place 1. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia. Eastern State Penitentiary opened in 1829 on the outskirts of what was then Philadelphia, and it was designed with a philosophical mission: to make prisoners reflect deeply on their crimes through long periods of enforced solitude. The theory was that isolation, silence, and introspection would produce genuine penitence. The word penitentiary comes directly from this concept. The building was designed by architect John Haviland in a radial spoke pattern with a central observation hub and long cell block corridors extending outward like wheel spokes. Each cell had its own individual exercise yard enclosed by high walls, a small skylight called the Eye of God, and no contact with other prisoners. Inmates who had to be moved wore hoods to prevent them from seeing or being seen by anyone. Complete silence was enforced. The system was considered revolutionary. Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and wrote about it in his travelogue American Notes, describing the experience as cruel and wrong. He was critical of the isolation model, writing that the prolonged sensory deprivation and silence inflicted a form of psychological suffering that was worse than physical punishment. His report contributed to international debate about solitary confinement that has continued ever since. At its most notorious, Eastern State housed Al Capone, who occupied a comfortably furnished cell, reportedly with rugs and oil paintings, during his 1929 stay on a weapons charge. And Willie Sutton, the bank robber who famously escaped from the prison in 1945 through a hand-dug tunnel with 10 other inmates before being recaptured. The prison closed in 1971 and sat abandoned for over 2 decades before opening to the public for tours in 1994. Today, it operates as a historic site and museum. The cell blocks are deteriorating, the cell doors hang open, and vegetation grows through the cracks in the stone floors. It holds one of the most popular Halloween haunted attractions on the East Coast every fall, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors. It is also genuinely one of the most interesting buildings in the United States. An architectural experiment in moral philosophy, now crumbling beautifully in the middle of a residential Philadelphia neighborhood where its stone towers loom above the row houses like a reminder that good intentions and terrible outcomes are not mutually exclusive. What makes Eastern State particularly worth visiting is the deliberate choice not to fully restore it. The administration made the decision to stabilize the structure for safety while preserving the atmosphere of decay, peeling paint, crumbling walls, collapsed roofs in certain wings, as part of the historical experience. Other historic sites scrub away the evidence of age. Eastern State wears it. The result is a building that communicates something no restored prison could, what it actually feels like to be inside a place that has been forgotten, then remembered, then opened and confronted rather than prettied up. It is the most honest building in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of those states people tend to think they know. Liberty Bell, Amish country, Penn State football. But underneath all of that is a genuinely strange place, full of burning ghost towns, musical rocks, Victorian bone collections, a pagoda on a quarry scar, a celibate commune that ran a printing press, and a shoe you can book on Airbnb. Every place on this list really exists. Every fact in this video checked out, and most of them are within a day's drive of each other, which says something interesting about what kind of state Pennsylvania actually is. It is a state that takes its history seriously, its eccentricities seriously, and occasionally its pizza more seriously than anything else. If this video was worth your time, hit the like button and subscribe. We cover the unusual, the overlooked, and the places most travel guides skip entirely. More coming soon.